So far on this channel, I've covered an anime series and 2 movies. The last topic on the list, at least according to the channel description, is video games. So what better way to start than by covering one of my favorite series, Yakuza.
運が悪かったんだよ、お前らは。
The popularity of the Yakuza series has taken off in a big way over the past few years, but in case you still don't know anything about it, here's some background. Yakuza is a series of 3D beat-em-ups created by Sega veteran Toshihiro Nagoshi of Super Monkey Ball fame. The games have been compared to open-world sandbox games like Grand Theft Auto, though you can't run amok or cause chaos like in those games. The only non-scripted fights here are random encounters with street thugs who are always the ones who confront you. The overworlds aren't these sprawling maps either, since you can run from one corner to the opposite in just a couple minutes. Though while the city districts you'll be exploring lack the size of a true open-world game, they make up for it in content. There's something to see or do around every corner, be it mini-games, side quests, or various fluff such as readable magazines in stores. And yeah, this is a real magazine. There's a serious attention to detail here, from the use of real brands to the cities having real-world counterparts. It all adds up to a truly authentic experience, without, for the most part, compromising on gameplay. As one would expect from the title, the plots of Yakuza heavily feature the dark underbelly of Japanese organized crime, though Yakuza is only the name of the series in the West. The original title is Ryu ga Gotoku, which roughly translates to like a dragon. I think this title is more emblematic of the series, and this'll probably become more apparent as I cover more games. Another interesting thing about Yakuza is that each game is set during the same month and year that they were released, aside from remakes and some other exceptions. This carries over in universe in a really cool way, since you get to witness the reoccurring town of Kamurocho gradually transform with each new game. Areas get renovations, and new construction projects will start in one game and won't finish until a couple games later. This adds a unique sense of intimacy with the setting that I haven't really seen any other game try to replicate. Now, if you're already interested in the series, you've likely been recommended to start with the series prequel, Yakuza 0, and may have done so already. But, and I know people are going to disagree with me on this, if there's one series I'd recommend playing in release order, it would be Yakuza. It makes for the most rewarding experience in the long term. It's not just the town that you get to watch slowly develop from game to game either. The gradual evolution of the characters and game mechanics are also a lot more cohesive when experienced in release order. I'll try to clarify further when I get to talk about some of the more recent titles. In a meta sense, I also hope you'll get to experience an evolution in video quality as I make more in this series. I've wanted to give my thoughts on this series in an open manner like this for some time. These guys with names I don't know how to pronounce have some pretty in-depth videos going into the nitty-gritty of everything. But for this series, I'm not going to be as detailed about the plots, and I won't mention any big spoilers unless I state otherwise. I'll be focusing more on the mechanics and how the series has evolved or branched off with each installment. Quick clarification before I finally get into things. I won't be making any big comparisons in this video to Yakuza Kiwami, the remake of Yakuza 1. I'll be making a completely separate video on that game later down the line. So let's start from the beginning with Yakuza for PS2, directed by Ryuta Ueda and produced by Toshihiro Nagoshi. In 2005, the Japanese game market was slowly waning in popularity due to the rise of Western giants such as Rockstar and Activision. Over at Sega, Nagoshi, instead of deciding to challenge these companies directly, attempted to create a new niche by making a game for the adult male demographic. Keep in mind, this was before 20-somethings like myself talking about video games on the internet was a popular thing to do, so games weren't a common hobby among that age range. Part of the reason why Nagoshi ended up deciding to focus the game on the Yakuza was because he thought people would likely be drawn in due to the violence of the topic. Kinda funny how at the same time in the West there was all this controversy about video games being too violent and how they're turning our children into criminals. Meanwhile in Japan, people weren't interested in games apparently because they weren't violent enough. The development team was made up of people who had experience in various Sega series, such as Virtua Fighter and of course, Super Monkey Ball. This was the first time Ryuta Ueda took the helm of director. Before this, he was an artist for games like Panzer Dragoon Saga and Jet Set Radio. The game had 2 writers, one for the main story and one for the side content. For the main plot, the team recruited Yakuza crime novelist Hase Seishu. The side stories were written by Masayoshi Yokoyama. Yakuza has gained a reputation over the years as being this goofy series full of stereotypical Japanese humor, but the main plots of these games take themselves pretty seriously. It's similar in tone to your typical seinen anime. The narrative is gritty and packs an emotional punch at times. The team wanted the tone of the main plot carried over in the side scenarios, and some ideas were scrapped for being too silly. This one side mission where you have to stop a man from killing himself over girlfriend troubles was almost left out because of this reason. Well, oh how times have changed. While we're on the topic of story, let's get into the narrative of this game. The plot begins in 1995. We follow a Yakuza named Kazuma Kiryu, the notorious Dragon of Dojima of the eponymous Dojima family. Things are going well for Kiryu until his sworn brother, Akira Nishikiyama, kills the head of the Dojima family for attempting to assault Kiryu's girlfriend, Yumi. Kiryu, being the noble guy that he is, takes the blame for the killing, and is sentenced to 10 years in prison. While in prison, Kiryu is expelled from the Tojo clan, the biggest Yakuza organization in Tokyo, which the Dojima family was part of. When Kiryu gets out of prison, he finds out that Kamurocho has undergone some dramatic changes. Aside from cell phones being a thing now, the Tojo clan is in disarray after the death of their patriarch. Along with this, 10 billion yen has been stolen from the clan. More importantly for Kiryu, his former best friend has turned to the dark side. Throughout the game, he meets other characters such as police detective Makoto Date and a young girl named Haruka Sawamura, and unveils a dark conspiracy. The game really has that classic East Asian crime melodrama vibe that you'd expect to see in a John Woo or Takeshi Kitano film. It explores the classic themes of honor, betrayal, and redemption. I think the plot is solid as a proof of concept, though it is a bit basic. It has a couple great moments, don't get me wrong, but nothing that had me searching for my lower jaw or anything. On the flip side though, there weren't any points that had me raising my eyebrows. A good chunk of the story focuses on subplots of side characters. I've heard a lot of people say that some of these moments would have been better as side quests, and yes, they do break up the pacing a bit, although this was the first appearance for all these characters, so it makes sense that the developers would want us to get to know them since some of them are going to be around for a while. Some characters are a lot more memorable than others, but the cast overall is likable. Our main character Kiryu follows the classic trope of the stoic badass with a heart of gold. A simple character type, but one that's always enjoyable when done well. Think Kenshiro from Fist of the North Star. Nagoshi wanted Yakuza to be a powerful, gritty story with a sense of humanity, and I think Kiryu encapsulates that very well. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty, but he also has a soft, caring side to him, equal parts cold and warm. Being an ex-Yakuza, Kiryu sports a sick tattoo of a dragon, which he shows off during the many iconic shirtless fight scenes across the series. His dragon is what the title Ryuga Gotoku makes reference to. The reason a dragon was chosen for Kiryu is actually pretty simple. Nagoshi thought that dragons had a strong image and that one would represent Kiryu's strength and manliness. Putting it that way, Ryuga Gotoku really is the perfect name for the series since there are a lot of manly men fighting each other. Date is a character clearly meant to appeal to a middle-aged crowd. He's an honest cop dedicated to revealing the truth behind the murder of Dojima and the disappearance of the 10 billion yen. He also has some family baggage that stems from him being a workaholic father. Haruka, the young girl who Kiryu becomes a surrogate father to, is also surprisingly likable for a child character. She has enough sass to have a personality personality, but not too much to the point she becomes annoying. And she's not as whiny as a lot of other fictional kids. While we're on the topic of side characters, I'd be remiss not to mention fan favorite Goro Majima. In this game, he has an air of mystery surrounding him. We don't know much about him at this point, other than that he's a work acquaintance of Kiryu's, and he's a bit crazy. Though we do get hints to another side to his character, which we won't get to see fully developed until the sequels. These are my personal favorite characters introduced in this game, though if I'm being honest, some characters feel a bit underdeveloped due to lack of screen time, and as a result, I didn't form as much of an emotional connection to them as the game likely wanted me to. Despite my nitpicks, I wouldn't say the plot is bad, it's perfectly serviceable. Compared to the rest of the series, I'd put it right in the middle. It's your standard Japanese crime story with conspiracies and plot twists. There are definitely a few games with far better stories in the series, but there are also some pretty weak ones. Yakuza is over 15 years old now, and yeah, the textures and models aren't going to look as detailed as the later games, but the PS2 games still have something over any of the later installments, and that's atmosphere. There are a lot of little aspects to the visuals that add up, like the use of weather such as snow to set the tone, and to really get you into that Christmas spirit. The game is set in December after all. The murky color palette, dim streetlights, and dark alleyways all add up to create a dingy, oppressive Kamurocho. The city is at its absolute grittiest here. The gritty atmosphere is enhanced even further by Hidenori Shoji's killer soundtrack. The majority of tracks are hard, aggressive rock tunes that get the blood pumping. The use of rap and sampling also gives the OST a distinctly modern, urban personality. This is the perfect set of tracks for a brutal action game in a contemporary setting. But Shoji also knows how to dial it back with some classier, more somber pieces. I don't think enough credit is given to the sound design of this game. It's a bit over the top, but man does it work well. The sounds of fists connecting and weapons smashing are tight and crunchy, making every blow feel super satisfying. While we're on the topic of sound though, I have to mention the elephant in the room, the dub. The consensus is basically unanimous, it ain't great. Most of the performances are bad, and they're not helped by the voice direction, which is even worse. They clearly didn't give a shit while working on this thing. They didn't even dub over most of the NPCs in the overworld. I mean, come on now, this is just lazy. Get a load of this guy who appears in 2 scenes and they still reuse the same take. Despite the infamy of the dub, there is some talent here. Robin Atkin Downes makes an appearance before he'd go on to give a legendary performance as Travis Touchdown in the No More Heroes games. Fuckhead! Of course, the one that everyone mentions is Mark Hamill as Majima. He honestly isn't too bad in this, and he's effectively sinister as Majima, but it's a bit awkward hearing the Joker using Japanese honorifics.
You're too kind, Kazuma-chan.
Michael Rosenbaum's portrayal of Nishiki wasn't bad either. His performance felt in line with the original intent. Kiryu's English voice, on the other hand, isn't as good. He definitely has the cold part down, but there's none of the warmth found in Takaya Kuroda's performance. It doesn't help either that he has some of the most wooden delivery in the entire game, and Dante's voice is what you'd get if you asked someone to do a gumshoe caricature. He sounds straight out of a kid's cartoon.
Sorry, Detective.
Well, either way I was bound to get the axe. Better now than later.
The dub isn't the localization's only problem either. The script includes a lot of unnecessary profanity, a lot of uses of the term motherfucker in particular.
Go! Kill this arrogant motherfucker!
Kill this dumb motherfucker!
There were also changes made to a couple of the characters' names. Kiryu's mentor figure, Shintaro Kazama, had his last name changed to Fuma. I assume this was done since the localization team thought Kazama sounded too similar to Kiryu's first name of Kazuma. If you aren't familiar with the series and play this game first, just know that his name is Kazama, not Fuma. I've also seen some audio glitches online, including Kazama's lines peaking the mic and really bad sound distortion in some scenes. I didn't encounter any of these in my playthrough though, and didn't see them occur in other people's playthroughs, so I assume they're the fault of a bad emulation experience. There are two large parts to Yakuza's gameplay: exploration and combat. Kamurocho's real-life counterpart is Kabukicho, a red light district in Shinjuku. The team clearly put a lot of effort into recreating Kabukicho, from the streets and landmarks to even the interiors of stores. Though despite the aesthetics of the PS2 games being top-notch, you can only see so much of Kamurocho at a time in this game. The town is actually made up of small areas with static camera angles, like an old Resident Evil or Devil May Cry. While exploring, you can get into enemy encounters, visit shops, and even enter restaurants to eat food, which restores health. There's also a plethora of side missions scattered around town. Yakuza is now well known for its side content, though if I'm being honest, this game has the weakest collection of side stories of the bunch. A lot of them are really simple and can be finished in about a minute, if even. Although this means they usually don't go on for too long. You'll usually be getting into simple fights or going on fetch quests for NPCs. There are also a lot of side missions in this game revolving around Kiryu getting scammed. In the narrative, Kiryu had just gotten out of jail, so I get that there are going to be a lot of people attempting to scam him, but there didn't need to be this many side stories centered around con artists. I'm being a bit negative, but there are a few good side missions here and there. There are a couple other good ones, but I'm mostly referring to the ones with pre-rendered cutscenes. The presentation of some of these is just as good as some of the best scenes from the main story. A lot of the side missions have alternate endings and can even be failed, but whether you fail them or not, once you finish them all, you get to fight a powerful optional boss, Joe Amon. He'll become a series staple. There are also collectibles in the form of these coin locker keys that can be found in various places on the ground. If you take them to the coin lockers in the center of town, you tend to get some good items out of it. Some of them are missable though, since they appear in locations you can't revisit. Make sure to keep an eye out for them. There's a good bit of missable content in this game in general, including some side missions that can only be completed in certain chapters. Missable content can be pretty annoying sometimes, but I kind of like the decision for this game. From a thematic standpoint, it makes sense. Kamurocho isn't a forgiving place, and things will keep on moving, regardless of whether you can keep up or not. Still, I can understand how people wouldn't share this opinion, but the game is short enough that it isn't too much of a hassle to go back and finish those missions on a repeat playthrough. Less annoying are the many little missable moments in the game. There are a lot of small events and characters that you can only encounter at certain points in the game, and first-time players won't have context for these. Repeat players, however, should get a kick out of these after knowing what happens in the story. Kamurocho is also host to several minigames, including batting, various gambling games, and that godforsaken crane game that's just as frustrating as the ones in real life. This installment has the least amount of minigames in the series though, and some of them, like batting, would be greatly improved and expanded upon in later entries. The minigames are kind of bare bones, but they are here if you want a distraction from the main game. Now let's get into the real meat of the game, the combat.
I did feel the urge to hit some balls today. Suppose yours will have to do.
The basis for Yakuza's combat was a previous Nagoshi title, Spike Out, a tough-as-nails arcade brawler. The mechanics were further refined and a new engine was created specifically for Yakuza. In terms of how the combat is broken up, there are 3 different scenarios. The first is short scripted fights where you're limited to a small arena until you defeat every enemy. The second scenario is the street fights, which are essentially the same, but think of them as random encounters in an RPG. The final combat scenario has you going through more expansive, extended levels. You'll go through a larger area and beat up mooks until you arrive at the end of the level. These sections are reminiscent of classic beat-em-ups like Final Fight. Speaking of classic beat-em-ups, there are a couple other similarities, such as health items scattered around the levels and weapons lying on the ground. There's also a shmup section at one point in the game, which kinda sucks. But hey, at least it's something different, and it's not as bad as something like, I don't know, Drakengard 3. As for the combat itself, you have your basics: light attacks, heavy attacks, grabs, dodging, blocking, and counters. There isn't a massive amount of combo variety to the game. You'll be pressing square anywhere from 1 to 4 times, and then follow it up with triangle for a combo finisher. Yakuza isn't really about stylishly executing crazy combos like in Devil May Cry or even a Tales game, but there is is a layer of strategy since you need to have a good sense of timing to pull off some of the better moves. The battle system is based around a mechanic called heat, which is built up from landing hits on enemies or taunting. Once you gain enough heat, it can then be expended to perform powerful dynamic attacks, aptly titled heat actions. Heat in this game dissipates pretty quickly if you're not doing anything, especially if you haven't unlocked the abilities that slow down the loss of heat. This encourages aggressive play, since you always need to be doing something if you want to hold on to that heat. I'll admit there were a few points where I got frustrated fighting multiple enemies at once. I wasn't paying enough attention to other enemies around me and left myself open for a lot of easy hits. This isn't a game where you can mindlessly button mash and expect a flawless victory. Well, there are a few fights where you can easily do that. But you need to consider the position of every enemy, because they will take advantage of any openings if you give them any. Eventually though, I got used to the more deliberate flow to this game's combat, and ended up enjoying it quite a bit. The fights are solidly designed for the most part, but things become a bit of a mess when enemies with guns are introduced. It's tough to dodge their shots when you already have your attention focused on a group of enemies. This is balanced slightly by gunshots doing minuscule damage. I kind of admire the ludonarrative dissonance here of the danger of guns. Somebody getting shot in a cutscene is a huge deal, but in the game, Kiryu can tank 20 gunshots no problem. If it were the opposite case, it would have made these fights a lot more frustrating. I wouldn't say Yakuza is a baby mode easy game, but there are 9 item slots if you want to stock up on healing items as a crutch. This does mean the game isn't particularly difficult either, but you do have to be somewhat competent to come out on top. There's sort of a lock-on in this game if you hold down R1, and I say sort of because it's kind of floaty. If an enemy dodges an attack, you can't reorient yourself mid-combo. Try not to let your combos go on for too long in that situation, cause Kiryu's not going to be punching anything aside from air. There's an HD version of this game released on PS3 and the Wii U? Huh. This version fixes a lot of the bigger issues like the lock-on, and has some extra things like the addition of these baseballs as an environmental hazard in the Majima fight. The dub also isn't present in this version, but sadly that's because it was only released in Japan. Sega seems to think that us getting the Kiwami games is the same as us getting the originals for modern hardware, but it's not. I would say the HD version of 1 is the optimal way to play it, but I know not everyone is willing to play a game in an entirely different language. If you are up to the task though, 90% of the game can be cleared pretty easily even if you don't understand Japanese, and there are always guides online if you get stuck. Yakuza also has some RPG elements, and this was before that was just a thing that showed up in every action game. You gain experience from defeating enemies or performing heat actions on them, along with completing side missions. That experience can then be used to gain new abilities. The game doesn't tell you what the abilities actually do until you get them, but it's not much of an issue since chances are you'll be fully upgraded by the time you reach the end, even if you don't tackle much of the side content. I did all the side content as it showed up, and I was maxed out by chapter 11 out of the 13 chapters in the game. It took me just under 20 hours to do everything in Yakuza, and by everything I mean finish the story, open every coin locker, finish Komaki training, clear every Coliseum battle, finish every side mission, and defeat the optional boss. I think this hits that perfect sweet spot considering the depth of the game's mechanics. There's enough content to feel like a complete package, but not so much that the game overstays its welcome. Yakuza is definitely rough around the edges, but much like Kamurocho and many of the characters, it's rough in a charming way. There's a lot of heart behind the game, and it's clear this was a passion project for the developers. Even today, I can say that Yakuza is a solid game. Despite some gripes here and there, I still had fun while playing it for this video. It's a game I definitely think more people should experience, especially if you consider yourself a Yakuza fan. While the framework would eventually be improved upon, this was still a promising start for a new IP at the time. We'll be finding out how the team improved on the formula next time in the sequel, Yakuza 2. See you then.